Okay, welcome to our first interview Zoom style. Today's guest, none other than Mach Bell, who has this brand spanking new book that is just something phenomenal. I recommend it to every fan of Aerosmith, rock and roll, Joe Perry, down the line, the early '80s. It really goes in depth about life on the road and life how it is in a band at that point in time. And in case if you don't know, Mock was the lead singer for this phenomenal album, Once a Rocker, Always a Rocker, also the name of his book. Welcome.
Hey, Joe. Hey, it's a pleasure to be on your show. I'm glad to get the chance to be on your first Zoom episode.
Thank you. Well, so much to talk about. Let's start off with the book, the diary. How did you come about writing the diary?
Um, well, it is a diary, so I mean it's a legitimate diary that I kept while I was with Joe. Um, I am a singer, so one thing that singers do, we don't have to carry guitar cases around and mess around with drums and all that stuff, but um, we do write songs, and so we tend to have like these little notebooks and pens, and we're always jotting down ideas. We hear something that we like, an idea from a movie or a song, or it's talking about something, and so it only seems natural to then start writing little notes about what happened here or there. And the next thing you know, you're keeping a diary. And so it didn't start with Joe Perry. I'd been doing diaries in my bands previous to Joe. Um, but in 1982, when I got this call out of the blue to come be the lead singer for Joe Perry's band, the Project, I definitely kept notes of everything that happened. I didn't know if it would only last for a minute, so I wanted to write that down. As it ended up, it didn't just end for a minute. It went for weeks and months and turned into years and adventure after adventure. And there was almost too much to process going on. So it was important for me to record it all in a book so that at some point in my life when I could sit back and reflect on what the heck just happened to me, I could look through it all. I had never at that point ever imagined that it would ever be a book that you could read. Um, that was something that it took many years for me to start to process that it kind of read like a book. It kind of has a opening. It kind of has these mini climaxes, and then it has these deep depressions, and then it rises back up, and you have it's like the structure of a novel, and then it has this very spoiler alert, but there's a sad ending because Joe actually quits our band to go join Aerosmith. And so there's this very sad, bittersweet ending that made for a very dramatic conclusion to the diary. So it didn't take very much to turn my diaries into a manuscript for the book that you just showed your viewers.
How long did it take you when once you decided to go ahead with the project?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. How long did it take for the book project?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. The flick of the switch really happened when Michael Butler, a podcaster out in San Francisco, told me that I absolutely had to publish these diaries. Um, that happened in February of 2019, and then they actually were published in September. So it was in those months, not that many months, like 7 months, where I locked myself right here in this little office that we're sitting in right now, and I had to color in the outlines a bit, because it was um, a diary I'd written for myself. Some words were misspelled, some words were missing. Some of the facts uh, town's roots, whatever, you know, I had to go back and do fact checking, they call it, to make sure I really had things spelled the right way, blah, blah, blah,
Right.
uh, and make it flow a little bit better. But, you know, the meat of it and the main thing is the timeline is true as true can be. Those day by day, that is how it went down. And that is what's missing in so many of the rock and roll books that you read, where weeks, months, and even whole years kind of get missing or messed up in when the rocker is trying to tell his tale a decade or two or three later. Um, and I certainly wouldn't have been able to tell the Joe Perry Project story now at my age if I hadn't had this daily timeline. I mean, it's amazing reading it. We played there? What? No, we didn't. And there's a lot of things that just really surprise me. But you know, the thing is, Danny Hargrove has read it and helped me with the audiobook. Joe Pet's read it. Um, the roadies have all read it and they've got back to me and like nobody has complained and said, oh, you missed this big chunk or you got this backwards or any of that. No, everybody's like, thanks for keeping notes on that. This is, it's bringing it back for us too.
Right.
Because those, you know, I mean, for anybody, what were you doing in July of 1982? You know, it's like, wow. Unless
Yeah, that's for sure. All right. Well, tell us a little bit about the what you did before joining the band. Thunder Train, I guess, would be a good point, unless you know you want to start up a little bit earlier than that.
you, I was, I'm here in outside of Boston. I was in a little town, Holliston, which is about two towns away from Hopedale, where Joe Perry was growing up. Joe's a couple years older than me. It's funny, Joe and I had some similar trajectory. I was in a band called Joe Flash in my town, Holliston. Joe had a band called Flash in his town, Hopedale. We both, for our first job, worked at metal finishing plants, places where they would like sand steel and tap holes in it and etch it. Uh, Joe was at Draper and I was at wood manufacturing. And we used to send jobs back and forth between Draper and wood, the different machines that we would use for the jobs. I was familiar with Joe's company. I didn't know Joe at that time. I never met Joe. I I was playing in my band Joe Flash. When I first saw him in '71, he had just begun with Aerosmith and uh, end of '70. So I saw one of his very first gigs at Lakeview Ballroom. Fantastic, blew me totally away, and he really inspired me with his guitar playing. I was a guitar player at the time, mainly. I sang as a secondary thing, but I was also very impressed with Joe's lead singer in Aerosmith. And there was a point at that time between '71 and '72 where I made the change from I was an okay guitarist. There were a lot of really hot guitarists around, Joe Perry and Brad being two of them. A lot of other guys, not nearly as famous as that, but just, really good technical guitarists. But there were no lead singers around. Nobody wanted to sing. And guys that did want to sing, you couldn't trust because why would anybody want to sing? Maybe they thought they could warble out a tune because they sang in the chorus or something. I'd been a rock and roller at that point for 5 or 6 years. I knew what a singer is supposed to do as a front man. Um, I wasn't totally secure that I had the right voice to do it, but I made that jump, and it was the smartest thing I could do. Because a year later, I was with Thunder Train, and with that group, we quickly became very well known in the Boston scene, New England. We're talking now early mid '70s, and we were playing at Max's Kansas City, CBGB's. In Boston, we had the Rat, the Club, the Paradise. These great concert clubs and underground clubs where you could play original music, have a big following. This is when the drinking age was 18. So young, excited crowd, packed, working 5, 6 nights a week without a record deal. I mean, we signed to a local label that was run by Earthquake Morton. We signed to a local label and did our own local records. We did a single in '76 called Hot for Teacher. And that was our calling card, Thunder Train. Everybody knew Hot for Teacher. It was a hot record all over Boston. It grew out through the Northeast, and then it went to England, and it charted in England on the alternative charts back when the Clash were first starting to come up and the Sex Pistols. We were right in the middle of all of that with Thunder Train. The thing was, though, we weren't as punky and as musically raw as those bands. Our band, we had a really hot drummer. We had an extremely talented, both of our guitarists. They weren't the, the 3-chord punk guitarist out of the cartoon, but personally, I was more of a fan of the punk stuff than some of the other guys in my band. And that's another thing I shared with Joe Perry. Joe Perry, for all of his Aerosmith classic rock fame, when I was with him in the Joe Perry project, the band that he played in the van every day was the Sex Pistols. Now, I don't know if it was anything about the singing or what they were singing about, or if it was the tone of the guitars. I think it was the anger. Joe was mad right then. His marriage was falling apart. He wasn't getting to see his young son. Money was gone all of a sudden. His band had broken up. His label had dropped him. He was working with me, which probably really made him mad. So he listened to the Sex Pistols while we traveled in a van and played all over the United States. We got down to South America. We were up in Canada a lot. Our manager, Tim Collins, who was also a kind of an untested guy with a big act like Joe Perry, he ended up being Aerosmith's manager, famously in the '80s, '90s. We stayed out on the road because Joe didn't really have a home at that point back in Boston. He was living kind of hand to mouth, and when he was in Boston, he was having to make court dates to fight for this or that, fight his wife, or fight for to keep his guitars, or to try to see his son. We stayed out on the road as much as we possibly could, so Joe would have a roof over his head and stay away from the trouble that was going on in Boston at that point, and also to write songs and to try to get a new record deal, which took us a very long time. Joe had put out 2 amazing records on CBS with the Joe Perry project following his departure from Aerosmith. But that ended, and he was without a label, which blew my mind. I was like, Joe Perry without a label? That guy, how come there's not 6 different labels looking to jump? But it was a funny time in the early '80s, Joe. It was, rock was not king at that moment. Led Zeppelin had broken up. Aerosmith were split. Kiss took off their makeup, and it was bands like the Police and the Cars and Cyndi Lauper and Boy George, and you didn't hear that much rock on the top 10 at that time. Van Halen were the one huge rock band during our time. Excuse me.
No, you're fine.
It's a rare thing to hear me stop talking during a review. Like one of those little monkeys with the cymbals. Ask me a question, and I can just go.
So what happened after Hot for Teacher now? Did you guys start picking up Thunder Train, and like how did Did it help get you guys bigger and everything?
Yeah. Yeah. The Hopper Teacher turned into then an album, Teenage Suicide, which was kind of a shock rock album. We drew a lot of influence from bands like Mott the Hoople, um, Alice Cooper, Slade from England. So we had this album, Teenage Suicide, in '77, and also we were on this compilation called Live at the Rat that was 10 Boston bands live set out of the Rat, which was our big Kenmore Square happening club. So we were riding those two records, and yeah, we were headlining all over the place. At this point, we had been together. So that's '77. So that's 3 years. 3 years is the magic number for a band, or it was back in those days. If you're going to happen nationally, internationally, it's going to be in your third year. And we were close, but now we were getting fished by Atlantic looked at us very seriously for a deal, Arista, a couple other labels, but we fell off the hook every time. And what was happening now, as '78 happened, now Boston, which is known for Aerosmith and Jay Giles, which we kind of fit into that hard rock Boston scene, all of a sudden the Cars are the new thing. And the band Boston, who are, have guitars, but also a very thick harmony vocal band, which we weren't. We were more like a New York Dolls, a rough-edged vocal, no, minor vocal harmonies. That wasn't our thing. It was a much more my fist, your face kind of music. So the taste of the record companies, it wasn't. I don't think it was the taste of the kids were changing, but the taste of the record company and the radio stations which was changing and moving more into that. I guess they called it corporate rock, where it was hard rock but with a sheen to it. And then it turned even more by the time Thunder Train decided. It was in our 50th year, the end of '79. Combination of the bloom was off the rose for the hard rock singing, the lead singer, lead guitarist duo kind of rock band. At that moment, it ended, and I was at butting heads with our lead guitarist, like lead singers and lead guitarists always do. We were having a war, like a mini Aerosmith. I was doing the same thing with Steven Silva that Joe was doing with Steven Tyler. So now all of a sudden I find myself out, and Joe finds himself out, and our new manager, Tim Collins, said, these are two guys that would be good together, Mach Bell and Joe Perry. And and he was right. And it was fantastic when we worked well together. But I knew that Joe had worked really well with another singer before me. And I had to keep my blinders on that it's Joe Perry project, and we're going to do this, and it's going to happen. And I continue to write and come up with ideas for videos and do the things that you have to do to move your band forward and not get invested in all this noise that I was hearing. Joe's going to get back with Aerosmith. Just watch, Steven Tyler and Joe, they're two peas in a pod. I don't hear that.
It must have been tough trying to, because especially before with the whole fiasco with MCA, how you were signed, then you weren't, and then you were again. It seemed like there was a lot of uncertainty, kind of.
Yeah, yeah. We didn't feel like the label was excited to have us. It was like we had managed to wedge ourselves in there. And like you say, that's a tough part in the book where, there's all this excitement as we begin the album finally after all that time working to get it, and then they drop us. Then Tim had to work like hell to keep us in the studio and at the same time fight with Irving Azoff, the president over at MCA, and try to get us back. It's a lousy way to be with your label where you have to fight to be on the label. And we didn't feel, we knew that there wasn't going to be a lot of money coming our way to do a big video or a limousine courtesy of your label to do this or that. We were, it felt like we were on the label, but they didn't really want to, what were they, the red
Promote it.
stepchild. Yeah, they didn't promote it. We did that on our own. Tim hired independent promotion men, and we did well. In some markets we went all the way to #1, and as long as we were in town, we'd be getting a lot of play and a lot of action would be happening. But like I wrote in the book, you never knew what was happening once we left town. The next big band would come into town, and in some places we had the staying power, but in others, it's tough biz, man. It's very
Mhm.
hard. Even if you're a Joe Perry, it's and I learned a lot from working with Joe. I always figured it's hard for little guys like me that nobody had ever heard of, but I figured somebody who had already done Walk This Way and Sweet Emotion would, he'd be walking on water and get whatever he wanted, but not so true.
Mhm.
It's always a fight.
Now that we're on talking about the album real quick, he's got a couple questions. So tell us about some of the songs that didn't make it on the album, because I know you were playing a couple of them actually live, but for some reason they just never made the final cut. Worlds Collide, I think, was one of them I saw,
Mm,
and something else.
yeah. Um, I can't speak to it totally because Joe was the producer on the album. He directed it, um, and so it was his decision in the end. And I don't think it was necessarily because he didn't like One Worlds Collide, or maybe going with something else, the Eddie Cochran cover, which we did record basics for in the studio, but didn't complete. I mean, part of it was we were still in the vinyl days. We were, near the end of the vinyl days. So you were limited to whatever it was, 18, 19 minutes per side on the record. So you only have a certain amount of minutes of music that you're allowed to make. Not like a CD these days where you can, have
Mhm.
5 bonus tracks. So you had to distill it down. Um, and then, yeah, it's a good question, Joe. I mean, I don't know why Joe didn't uh, push forward with his song First Ones for Free, which we'd been doing live, written totally by Joe. It was one of the songs I co-wrote 7 of the songs on the Once a Rocker album. Um, you would think that Joe would go for that extra tune with just his uh, name on it, collect the whole royalty for himself. But no, he didn't push forward on that. So yeah, that's it's a funny game to try to figure out why we went with what we did. And definitely in hindsight I go, geez, it would have been good to have that, like the one you mentioned, Worlds Collide, or They'll Never Take Me Alive, or um, there were several other ones that we demoed out that um, could have worked.
Mhm.
uh,
Another question about that was the Black Velvet Pants. That's the one you made the video for, and
hmm,
you had a big hand in that, as people will read once they get a copy of your great book there. But question I had about that is I noticed the video itself actually has like a different ending as opposed to the actual single or the album version. I was wondering, any idea how that all came about? Was there planned like that, or what was the deal there?
you got sharp ears, Joe. Good for you. Yeah, it is. It's an alternate mix that we used. Um, well, part of it was, I have to admit, and Joe doesn't blame me for it, but it was my bright idea to. I mentioned to Joe, why don't we just cut Black Velvet Pants? Just take the razor and just slice it and just have it end. I said, remember that great tune on the second Jeff Beck group album, Rice Pudding, when they're just jamming like crazy and then bing, it just stops. Joe's like, yeah, that was good. That's how they ended that album. So you're just like left in suspended and I don't know if it was such a good idea when Jeff Beck did it either. Well, the problem was, it was kind of cool on our album because the album it builds up and then it stops, and then you just hear the chains on the ground as the girl's walking, dragging the chains. That's what I always hear anyway, the
Hmm.
dragging the chains um, for women in chains. So that it kind of works dramatically there, but it drove the DJs crazy because they wanted to play the song because it was playing on MTV, but DJs want to have a fade out at the end. They they don't like songs that just end, and especially ones that end like ours, where you don't even have any idea when it's going to end because it just arbitrarily we cut the tape there. Some songs, just end, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, boom. But this one wasn't like that. It just ended. Um, so that's one story that's not what you asked. What you asked was why did we go with the one we did? Was because in filming it, we knew we were going to do the girl with the pink saxophone storyline, and we wanted to have a chance for that jam to cook and happen visually, and we didn't want to have that arbitrary ending happening every time we filmed it because we were filming it to a track, miming to a track that was playing. Um, so we pulled that other mix of the song. I think it's the same mix of my vocal parts and everything that happens. I think that's got most of what happens on the album track, if I'm not mistaken, but it just has um, a longer saxophone guitar trailer. But you might know better than me on that.
You would know more than me.
Man, I just like to dance to the music. I don't get all like into, oh, Cowboy sang that line a little bit different. I'm I'm pretty. I wouldn't have made a good record producer. For me, it was hard when Joe was in the studio producing the record. He said, "Come on down, Cowboy. You can hang out with me. Be in there for 14 hours. I'm going to work over this same phrase over and over and over again. It's going to be
Mm.
a lot of fun." And I'm like, Joe, you can do that. I don't. I like to go out and do a rock show. I'm not into polishing a phrase and hearing it like water torture.
Yeah, as you've talked before, that album, obviously Black Velvet Pants was the video and everything, but it seems like there could have been so many other. And I remember actually, if you when people read the book, they'll understand a little bit better. But a lot of different stations were playing different songs off the album at the time of it came out and everything, which is interesting because at that time, usually, if you had full record company behind you promoting it, they would have been focusing on one song at a time. And in your case, the radio stations were just throwing on, you had like up 4 or 5 different ones going at once.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's another shows how the the company didn't give a damn about us and didn't have any. There was no game plan. There was no strategy behind. They released it. You know, i- I think they were just hoping that Aerosmith fans that remember Joe from that band would buy it. They were not looking towards developing uh, our group into anything or giving a serious listen to any of the tunes. I mean, that song, "Bang a Gong," we we did that one. See, so "Bang a Gong," I don't know if it's the strongest song on the album. People would say you should have done "Worlds Collide" or one of your other originals instead of that one. But the thing was, we were analyzing Van Halen, and the way Van Halen were getting on the radio back then was by doing cover songs like "Oh Pretty Woman" and "Dancing in the Streets," hits from other artists. We It was like 10 years since T-Rex had a hit with "Bang a Gong." We had been playing the song live, gained a good reaction. It fit our band, and we said, this song could be a hit. This song could fit into what's going on in 1983. And sure enough, a few months after our album disappeared, this band Power Station cut the same song, Bang You're Gone, and went straight, to the top 10 with it. And it was in the top 10 for the whole season. And it killed me. I was like, ours could have been that.
Oh
If the
yeah.
if the company had got behind it, and they could get behind it before we even finished it, and could have given us some direction on what worked about it and what didn't work about it. I mean, we didn't have anything like that either. We didn't have any kind of direction from an A&R guy who would come in and point out, these are the strong points of your band, and you should do more of this kind of thing. It was just like, play whatever you want, boys. We'll throw it out there and see how it does.
So Joe basically pretty much had free reign on the producing then.
Yeah, 100%. And and I'm not up to date on all Joe's productions since then, but up to that point, it was his first time he'd ever been the full producer on anything like that. He had good help. We had an engineer and we had a piano player, production guy that worked along with Joe and really brought a lot to it. But no doubt Joe was the captain of the ship, and he was there all the time. He wasn't one of those producers that stops in, has some tea, and says, "Good luck, boys," and heads out the back. He was in there through the whole thing.
I would say, for a first time, that was that you did a great job. It's just a shame, like we said, that it just wasn't properly promoted, unfortunately. But another thing I was going to ask you about was King of the Kings. How did that song come about? That song is probably my favorite song on the album.
Yeah, that's a when Joe started playing that riff, that was one that came together closer to the production of the actual album. We didn't invent that one out on the road like some of the other songs. And yeah, when Joe played that riff, to me, it really reminded me of. It brought me back to Aerosmith, uh, in their 74, 75, that period of Aerosmith, and I will admit that on that one, I did try to kind of write as much as I could. I tried to get my head in kind of a Steven Tyler place and write a kind of um, a Tyler type of thing to go with it. I can't quite remember how, Joe and I would always play ping pong with these things. I would be writing these lyrics just on my own. Um, Sometimes the title would be inspired by something I'd heard Joe play. Other times I would tell Joe a title of something I was working on that would inspire him to play a riff that fit that title. And on King of the Kings, I can't quite remember whether I already had the lyrics all crafted before I ever heard Joe play it. 'Cause sometimes Joe would start playing something awesome, and then I'd look through my books and try to find something that would fit in. Other times I would write custom to what he was doing. I have to look back at that. But yeah, that was and so that was really a studio creation pretty much. I mean, rehearsal hall to the studio, and it was a tricky one to play live, although we did pull it off and do it live. The tricky part being that Joe plays the song on guitar like he normally does, but he played the lead guitar break is on that six-string bass that he famously played on Back in the Saddle. That big Back in the Saddle riff is played on a six-string bass. He used that same bass for that ripping lead break in King of the Kings, and so I try to explain it. I don't know if I explained it well in the book because it's kind of visual, but yeah, he'd be out there playing his guitar, but he'd have that big bass strapped on his back, and
Hmm.
then we'd get to this break in the song, and he'd swing the guitar off, and then pull the bass down and go right into that bass lick, and it was really exciting on stage to see it. That happened, but then the hard thing was he'd finish it, and then he'd have to. I can't remember whether he swung the bass back or if he ditched it off the side to his tech, and then he had to get his guitar back into playing position and finish the song. That was hard to get back to the guitar playing position, and I think we invented a slightly longer drum roll segue that would allow Joe that space to recalibrate back to being a guitarist from being a bass player. It was a fun thing to see him actually pull it off live in a little club.
Yeah. uh, Pretty much. Yeah. One last thing on regarding the thing here. I noticed in the book, at some point in the book, it mentions the fact that when you had one of your famous conversations with Tim, he said, "Well, you're only going to probably sing on a couple songs because Joe's going to be bringing in a couple of his friends to help sing on the album." And obviously, that must have hurt because you're expecting to be on the album and play on every. And the funny thing is, it actually turns out you actually play on all the songs on the album in the finished product. Something none of the other Joe Perry Project singers ever did.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, that was the hill I had to climb in my time with the band. Yeah, Joe was planning to bring in his famous friends to sing, and that makes a lot of sense. That'd be cool to have famous friends that you could bring in to sing on your songs. And he didn't know me from a hole in the wall, and nobody figured it would probably be any different from the first two Joe Perry Project albums. What they didn't, and as I talk about in the book, when I started out in the band, I didn't sing center stage like lead singers normally do. Joe was the center stage star, and I was off on the side,
Mhm.
singing on the microphone, just this stranger that came in off the street. So I had to fight my way to the center stage as a singer, and to gain Joe's confidence as a partner in songwriting. And then as we wrote songs and then brought them to the stage, and as we started to meld together as a performing team, he came into this being very gun shy about his lead singers. He'd had a really rough time with Steven, and things had been not totally great with the first two project singers for different reasons. So they didn't last. And so, and and his marriage had fallen apart. I mean, everything seemed to be falling apart for Joe. So the fact that the two of us formed a bond and a real friendship for a couple of years there, and as well as a professional working relationship, um, it turned everything around. And that's why it ended up that I share the writing with Joe, and he ended up letting me sing everything on the record. He didn't even do his one, he always does at least one tune where he sings lead, but nah, let the cowboy do it. So that was very meaningful to me. And if you look at Joe's autobiography, under the picture of me in the book, me with Danny Hargrove and Joe Pett, he says that these are without a doubt the most fun guys I ever played in a band with in my life. A real bunch of pirates. He's played with a lot of people, a lot of really famous people, and so it's very touching to me that he would say what he said in his book about us.
Right. Right. Well, we've talked a lot about the book here, and that's one thing that that was the main thing. Wanted to let people know about the book once again. Diary, once a rocker, always a rocker. Now, one thing you actually went and did, which I didn't mention yet, was that you went back in and made it an audiobook, which maybe you want to explain that and tell it to everybody what that includes.
Yeah, well, after we did the book, it was I didn't want to I didn't want to read the book. I didn't want to go back and do an audiobook. People are saying do an audiobook, and I just spent a year in this office writing the thing. And I said, let me away from this book. But my mentor, Earthquake Morton, called me and said, Cowboy, let's do it, and I'll help you out. He said, I'm the guy that called you from Tim's office and got you into this thing in the first place. So, we can reenact that. Imagine that. Imagine the audiobook opens up with the phone call with me saying, I'm at Tim's office and Joe Perry needs a singer. And you got to learn these 6 songs. And I was like, wow, that's kind of interesting. And so it ended up, the book is just one adventure after another. When Joe and I went out hitchhiking together in California, when we went down to Caracas, Venezuela, and had these really bizarre adventures, and people were setting fires in the arena while we played, and uh, gigs where our road manager got arrested and carried away, and Joe passes out and we have to wrap him up and bring him to another hotel, and he doesn't even know what's going on because he's out cold. And I mean, there's highs and funny parts, and there's also lows, like when Joe has a fit and passes out cold in front of 1,000 people on our first coast to coast tour, and that ends the tour right there on the 6th date. I mean, every day in this diary is another crazy drama. So when Earthquake said, I can set up the scenes and then you come in with the action and we'll make it kind of more like a movie. And then I said, wow, that sounds cool. And then we started recording. And I said, wow, wouldn't it be cool if we could get Danny Hargrove, the bass player, to come in and say something? And hey, maybe we can get Charlie Farron to come in. He was the singer before me and he can fill in some blanks. And then Carter Allen, he was the DJ at WBCN through the whole thing, playing our records. He probably has some cool stories. So I got in touch with people. And we did this all last summer. Right when we're taping this during the pandemic. The pandemic was just getting rolling pretty much last summer, and so I benefited because a lot of these guys were at home, and we all have our own recording studios at home, so we could record these things and pass them back and forth and put it together into this this audio book. And so if you're into Joe Perry or rock and roll stories, or road dogs and crazy Playboy bunnies, and man, I can't even tell you half the stuff. Every page is brings back another memory. Then yeah, thanks for. I'm glad, Joe, you bring up the audiobook. Yeah, the book is the main thing, but a lot of people are digging the audiobook because I did get a chance to tell some different stories that are not in the original book, and also answer. A lot of people were finishing the book immediately had questions and were sending me emails. What happened to this guy or that guy, or what happened next? So I was able to make a little epilogue chapter where I kind of wrap up, what happened to a lot of the characters, because you do kind of get wrapped up in their lives because you spend a full 2.5 years with them when you read the book. Although it doesn't 2.5 years to read the book. Too many people say, geez, I got your book and I read it in a day. I couldn't put it down. I'm like, dude, you read it in a day. It took me 2.5 years to write that. 330 pages, but it's a pretty fast read if you're into rock and roll, because it does kind of get you going, get wrapped up in the adventure.
Oh yeah, definitely hard to put down. Once you start reading it, you definitely hard to stop. You want to definitely finish it for sure. All right, well, tell them how about how they can order the book, and plug anything else you're interested, you want to let people know about, and tell them how they can do all that.
Well, thank you for that opportunity. This book is, very, it's a small deal. It's not like one of those big Aerosmith books or Joe Perry's book through Simon and Schuster. This is just a small thing. So you won't find it in any bookstores. You won't find it anywhere. You probably have never even heard about it until you tuned into this show. The way you find it is it's called Once a Rocker, Always a Rocker, a Diary by Cowboy Mach Bell. If you put that in a Google search, you'll immediately find it for sale in 100 different online bookstores, mainly Amazon. Amazon backed it from the beginning, and they've done an incredible job for me. Audible does the audiobook, Audible and iTunes. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Waterstone, Walgreens, all those places online have Once a Rocker, Always a Rocker, a Diary. And oncearocker.com is my website. Oncearocker.com is a clearinghouse for, I've got all my photos and links to shows like this one that we're doing right now, and different appearances and things doing. I was going to do a big book signing tour, but it was going to begin March 13th, 2020, right when the day that the pandemic began. So I got a truck parked out front with 2,000 books in the back of it, ready to roll as soon as we can start the book tour back up. But in the meantime, go to oncearocker.com. Oh yeah, and autograph books. I'd love to autograph and personalize a book. Tells you how to do that on oncearocker.com. We back here? Hey everybody, this is Cowboy Mach Bell from the Joe Perry Project, and I'm on Rock Show Critique with Joe Sudo.